The Prince and the Dust of Her Doorstep. Good evening, traveler of words. Tonight you'll walk through a place where the wind carries more than sand. It carries decisions, silences, and small acts of resistance that no one dares to notice, except those who have eyes to see the invisible. Close your eyes if you want, imagine the sounds, and if you can, stay until the end. Because sometimes the heart of a child changes the course of an entire empire. If you can, like, comment, and subscribe to the Secrets and Destinations channel. We're about to begin. The sun had not yet reached its peak in the sky, but already it pressed down on the earth with the slow, relentless weight of ancient judgment. The land stretched out in muted silence, as if holding its breath. Cracked and grey, the soil split into jagged lines like a shattered plate, and between those veins of dryness, stubborn life still pulsed. Not loudly, not proudly, but persistently. Hidden in the roots of 12 olive trees, Salma Nadir kneeled in that silence, her knees dusty, her fingers sunk deep in the earth. She wasn't praying. She was checking the roots, listening, as she did every morning, for signs. The trees didn't speak in words. They answered through tension, through dryness, through the way the wind moved their limbs. And today, they were quiet, alert, as if they too were waiting. She wore a faded linen jalaba, speckled with pollen, sweat, and the soft memory of ash. Her scarf, once ocean blue, had turned into something earth-toned, like everything else the desert touched. Her skin, browned and calloused, was the map of someone who never looked away from work. Her hands knew every knot in the bark. Her feet knew every crack in the floor of the land. Beside her, Hana struggled to balance the weight of an old tin watering can. She was 6 and small for her age, all legs and questions. "It's too heavy, Mama," she muttered, swaying. "Then use 2 hands, Salma said, without looking up. "I am," Hana grumbled, "but it's heavier than yesterday." "Then maybe today you're stronger." Hana paused. She liked that idea. Omar watched from the wall. At 10, he had already learned not to fidget. He had eyes like his father, deep-set and dark, always calculating. But unlike his father, he stayed. Omar had stopped asking when his father would return years ago. He had replaced that question with others, quieter, heavier. "Do you always talk to the trees, Mama?" he asked from above. "I do," Salma replied. "Do they talk back?" "They don't scream, but they answer." He nodded. He'd never heard them himself, but he had learned to trust her hearing. There was no horizon beyond the dust. Salma's grove was a whisper. 12 olive trees, gnarled and quiet, scattered across the cracked soil. None of them were young, all of them were memory. Then came the sound, not thunder, not song, a mechanical growl that thickened the air. It didn't belong. It was the kind of sound that declared its presence instead of asking to be heard. Tires churned up clouds of white dust as a black SUV carved a path up the road, its glossy exterior glaring like wet oil in the sun. 2 more vehicles followed, one narrower, one marked with the royal crest. They gleamed like they had never met mud. Salma didn't move. She stood slowly, wiped her palms on her skirt, and fixed her eyes on the growing silhouette. Omar jumped from the wall, bare feet landing with a soft crunch. Hana dropped the watering can, water sloshing over her toes. Salma remained still, her feet pressed firmly into the ground as if they could grow roots in seconds. Her heartbeat didn't quicken, but her silence did. The SUV came to a stop in front of the largest tree, the one they called the Old Father because its trunk had split once, then healed. The door opened with a quiet hiss. A man stepped out. He was taller than she remembered from the newsreels. Tall, lean, skin the tone of honey left too long in the sun. His beard was trimmed, his hair cut short in a style that was expensive without trying too hard. He wore a pristine white linen shirt, rolled at the sleeves, and slacks that had never known creases or fieldwork. Sunglasses covered his eyes, but not his intentions. Salma said nothing. "Salma Nadir?" he asked. His voice had the rounded consonants of a man educated in Europe, but anchored in the vowels of the desert. "I am. I'm Prince Zain El Fayez. I've come on behalf of the Royal Resettlement Ministry. This property has been transferred to the Crown. You have 72 hours to vacate." He stepped forward and extended a thick envelope sealed with the royal emblem. The paper glinted with gold. Official, cold. Salma didn't take it. Hana moved behind her, clutching at her skirt. Omar stepped beside her, arms at his sides, fists clenched but hidden. "I'm sorry," she said. Her voice didn't rise. It barely moved the air. "But I won't leave." The prince tilted his head slightly. He had expected something. A plea. A demand. Tears, maybe. What he found instead was resistance so rooted it made no sound. His sunglasses hid the flicker in his eyes, but Salma saw it anyway, the brief stutter of certainty. "I'm not here to debate," he said, voice even. "Then you're wasting your time," she replied. "Because I am." He took a step forward. "You understand this is lawful." "I understand many things. Law is only one of them." Zain lowered the envelope. "Do you have documentation that disputes the transfer?" "I have a grave beneath that tree," she said, pointing with her chin to the oldest olive. "I have children who sleep in the room their father built with his hands. I have 12 trees older than your bureaucracy. Is that enough documentation?" Hana tugged gently at her mother's hand. Omar narrowed his eyes. Zain opened his mouth, then closed it. His assistant, who had stood silently behind him until now, stepped forward with a tablet in hand. "We can provide assistance for the relocation," he said. "There are housing projects outside the capital, with plumbing, electricity, new furniture, a school." Salma's eyes never left the prince. "Does the school teach them to forget?" No one answered. She stepped forward, took the envelope, and dropped it in the dirt between them. "I'll compost it," she said. The assistant flinched. Prince Zain didn't speak. He only looked, not at the house, not at the trees, but at Omar, at the boy standing between his mother and a future no one had asked him about. Then, without another word, the prince turned, walked back to his vehicle, and left. The tires stirred more dust. The cicadas resumed their song. And Salma, barefoot and steady, bent to pick up the watering can her daughter had dropped. She poured what remained onto the roots of the youngest tree. They didn't scream, but they answered, roots deeper than decrees. Before the sun even touched the ridge of the eastern hills, Salma was already awake, standing in the cool dark of her kitchen, hands plunged into the basin of well water. The cold reached her bones, and she welcomed it. It reminded her she still had nerves, still had skin. She moved without sound, careful not to wake her children. Mornings like these, she didn't want to start the day. She wanted to hold it still, just a little longer. Her movements were slow but precise. She soaked a cloth, wrung it, wiped the table, the windowsill, the crack in the door where dust always slipped through. She didn't clean to impress. She cleaned to prepare, to remind the walls they were still inhabited. Omar stirred on his mat near the window. His legs were tangled in the blanket, his jaw clenched even in sleep. He'd grown another inch this summer. She noticed not in his height, but in the way he moved, in the way he watched her without questions, as if he too understood that they lived on borrowed time. Hana slept beside the cracked clay wall, curled into herself like a cat. Her braid had come undone in the night, and her fingers still held tight to her fabric doll. The way she breathed, softly through her nose, with one hand open toward the sky, made Salma's chest ache. Outside, the old olive tree creaked. The oldest one, the one whose roots had been there before any road, before any title, before the men with machines and signatures. It moved like a spine under the ground. She poured water into the cracked kettle, set it on the iron stove, and lit the flame. The kettle hissed slowly, filling the silence. And that's when she felt it again, the pressure in the air. A stillness, a pause. as if something were waiting to arrive. At the edge of the district, in a rented guest house with peeling white paint and shuttered windows, Prince Zayn El-Fayez sat barefoot on a straw mat, holding a cup of bitter coffee between his hands. The room was bare, a table, a chair, a fan that creaked when turned on, and a small radio that buzzed static. He hadn't slept. He'd replayed her voice again and again in his mind. "I won't leave." The defiance hadn't been loud, but it had landed inside him like a stone in still water, rippling deeper than he expected. He wasn't used to defiance without shouting, or power without performance. He had met kings who bowed under pressure, businessmen who flinched at regulation, generals who grew quiet when faced with reform. But she didn't raise her voice. She didn't tremble. She just stayed. The second day had begun. Omar was already on the roof again, sharpening a stick against the edge of the stone. Not for war, just for control. Hannah washed her doll in the water basin, gently rinsing the dust from its stitched cheeks. She hummed a song she didn't remember learning. Salma stood in the doorway, hands on her hips. She had heard the engine minutes before. This time it wasn't a procession, just one car, a dusty grey sedan, nothing official, nothing royal. It parked a few feet from the house and idled for a moment before the engine cut. The prince stepped out alone. His shirt was no longer pristine. It had creases now, sweat stains at the collar. His beard had grown slightly overnight, the edge uneven. His shoes were no longer polished. He looked human. She didn't move. He approached with the quiet confidence of someone unsure of what they would say. "I came back," he said. She nodded once. "I noticed. I thought about the roots." She raised an eyebrow. "You said they remember. That the trees don't scream, but they answer." "I did. I think I want to learn how to listen." She didn't answer, just opened the door and let him pass. The house was darker than it had been yesterday, curtains closed to block the midday glare, the floor swept clean, a rug laid out for no one in particular. Zayn sat on a wooden stool in the corner, removed his sunglasses and placed them on his knee. Omar peeked in through the hallway, narrowing his eyes. Hannah stood by her mother, still holding the wet doll. "Do they know who I am?" Zayn asked. "They know what you are." He let out a breath, more sigh than laugh. "I was raised in a world where people moved when I entered the room, where answers were given before I asked." Salma began grinding cumin seeds in a small mortar. She didn't look up. "Then maybe this is the first real room you've been in," he smiled faintly. "They told me this land had no registered heir, that the title passed back to the state after your husband's death. That's why I came." "And what did you see?" He looked at her. "I saw a woman who doesn't belong to papers." A long silence passed. Only the grind of seeds and the ticking of a small tin clock filled it. "Did you bring your decision?" she asked. "No." "Then you brought your doubt." He looked down. He nodded. "I dreamed of a tree last night. Not yours. One from my childhood. My grandmother had one in the palace courtyard. She used to sit under it for hours. I never knew why. She told me that people forget to listen when they learn how to order." Salma's hand paused. "I never forgot that tree," he said, "but I forgot what it taught me." She poured tea. He accepted the glass with both hands. Steam rose between them, softening the edges of their silence. "Why are you really here?" she asked. He looked around, at the clay walls, at the tiny cracks patched with love, at the sandals neatly placed by the door, at the blanket folded with care over a threadbare chair. "I think I'm trying to remember who I am," he said. Hannah tugged at Salma's sleeve. "Can he stay for lunch?" Zayn blinked. Salma didn't look surprised. "If he eats what we eat," he smiled. I'd be honored. She ladled lentils into clay bowls. No meat, no garnish, just lentils, onions, cumin, salt. The kind of meal that didn't pretend to be anything more than survival. And yet, it tasted of warmth. They ate in silence. After the meal, Zayn stood slowly and stretched. He walked to the doorway, looked out over the field. The trees stood still, but the wind had changed. "I'll come again tomorrow," he said. Salma said nothing. He turned to go, then paused. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For letting me be no one." He left, and the trees once again did not scream, but they answered. The ministry, the map, and the mute tree. The world outside didn't stop, far from it. Papers still moved through marble halls. Phones still rang with decisions made by people who had never stood in a field. Ministers drank imported coffee while signing eviction forms. Maps were redrawn with thick pens, and no consideration for the shape of the land or the breath of the people who lived on it. But in that house of sun-dried clay, among olive trees and children's footsteps, time obeyed a different rhythm. One no decree could touch. Salma knew this. She didn't hope for mercy from institutions. She didn't wait for a miracle. Instead, she waited the way stones wait, without moving, without pleading. And yet, her movement spoke. Every morning she swept the yard with greater precision, as if the act itself carved her claim into the ground. She pressed her hands deeper into the soil when she watered the trees, whispering to them not as a ritual, but as a declaration. "This is mine. This is still mine." That morning the sun rose thin and silver, not yet warm but sharp, as if testing what kind of day it would be. Omar helped his mother repair a cracked window with strips of linen and ash glue. Hana tried to brush dust from the corners of the room, humming under her breath the tune she claimed belonged to the trees. Salma watched them both in silence. There was strength in the way they moved through the morning, as if it belonged to them, and not the prince. But the prince did not come that day. He didn't send word. He didn't knock. His absence was quiet, but pronounced, like a missing tile on a roof. Salma didn't ask where he was, but she noticed. What she didn't know was that, at that exact hour, Prince Zayn El Fayez was seated inside a temperature-controlled chamber in the capital, surrounded by men who believed numbers were truth and silence was consent. He wasn't wearing linen anymore. Today, he wore a navy suit with subtle embroidery near the collar, a blend of tradition and diplomacy. His fingers were clean, but the dirt from Salma's grove still clung to the corners of his mind. The Minister of Resettlement, a man whose voice never broke rhythm, spoke without looking up from his tablet. "Your Highness, you were scheduled to confirm the final transfer today. The directive was signed last month. Construction permits are active. The land's prior documentation is incomplete. There is nothing preventing execution." Zayn didn't answer immediately. He looked at the table, its perfect surface gleaming under the artificial lights. It was wide enough to seat 12, but no one touched anything on it. No one ever spilled tea there. No one's child ever left fingerprints. The minister continued, "We've already allocated 42% of the southern plots for the development phase. The tourism board is projecting a tenfold increase in regional value by 2030. If we delay now, we risk renegotiation." Still, Zayn remained silent. A junior advisor, too eager for his title, leaned forward with a smile he thought was reassuring. "We understand there are personal feelings involved. Perhaps a compromise. Relocation with compensation. We could even offer media coverage. Frame it as an act of cultural preservation." Zayn looked up at last. His voice, when it came, was low. "You think her house is culture to preserve?" The room went quiet. "It's not culture. It's presence." A pause. Then the minister cleared his throat. "With all due respect, Prince Zayn, we are speaking of one woman, one small home, a dozen olive trees that no longer produce. He reached into his folder and slid across a map. This is the future. These are numbers, cities that breathe commerce, corridors of progress. Zane stood slowly. He didn't raise his voice, and I'm telling you, those trees are breathing too. I touched them. They are not finished. Another advisor scoffed quietly. Are you seriously suggesting halting state expansion for the sake of 12 trees and an unregistered widow? Zane didn't flinch. Instead, he removed something from his pocket, a handful of dry soil. He dropped it on the table. It scattered like ash across the glossy surface. That land is alive. That woman carries it in her spine. Her silence is older than our treaties. If we erase her, we erase something we cannot name again. The silence stretched this time, not of deference, of discomfort. The minister straightened his spine. Your Highness, may I remind you that your position here is administrative. The crown expects leadership, not sentiment. Zane's gaze sharpened. And what is leadership if not knowing when to disobey? He turned, not waiting for permission, and left the room. The echo of his footsteps rang louder than anything said. Back in the grove, the wind moved strangely. Not fast, not cool, but dense, as if it carried something heavy. The trees swayed without rustling. The sun shifted, its heat dull but steady. Salma was spreading ash around the base of the trees, a trick her grandmother taught her. The ash didn't just nourish, it warned insects, it sealed memories. Hana ran barefoot between the rows, arms stretched like wings. Omar had stopped drawing. He just stood now, watching the road, as if he too knew the rhythm of absence. Then he said it, he's not coming. Salma didn't look up. Maybe today he's elsewhere. Omar squinted. You think he's afraid? Salma pressed her palm into the dirt. Maybe he's remembering. The afternoon unfolded like a poem without stanzas. One long breath of dust and waiting. When the heat finally loosened its grip, Salma gathered her children and lit a small lamp in the corner. They sat close together. Hana asked for a story. Salma didn't tell one. Instead, she spoke of the day the first tree was planted by her husband. Before there was a roof, before there was fear. She described the way his fingers dug the hole, the way he didn't speak, only worked. She told them how the sapling trembled when the wind rose and how he shielded it with his own coat. She didn't cry, but her voice grew thinner as the night deepened. When the lamp began to flicker, Omar stood up and left the room. He returned with his drawings, stacked in a bundle tied with twine. He placed them on the table, for him. If he returns, Salma didn't touch them, but her eyes did. Outside, the olive trees held their posture. Inside, the house breathed, and far away, in the back seat of an unmarked car returning down the mountain road, Prince Zain El Fayez rested his forehead against the window. He said nothing. But in his chest, something had shifted. He hadn't said yes, but he hadn't said no. And for the first time in years, the silence inside him had begun to crack, when the past spoke louder than the law. The day was already warm by mid-morning, but inside the house the air felt heavy in a different way, the kind of weight that doesn't come from heat, but from memory, from words unsaid, from footsteps that echo without ever touching the floor. Salma stood by the hearth, stirring lentils with a wooden spoon, her movement steady and slow. She wasn't cooking out of hunger. She was cooking to give time a shape, to give silence a rhythm. Omar sat at the table, head bent over an old notebook. He wasn't writing, just drawing lines, tracing routes, imagining trees that had never been cut. Hana watched a moth flutter near the window, eyes half lost in the light. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. Then a sound, different from the sharp roar of SUVs or the hollow knock of officials. It was a soft tap, 3 times, not a demand, a request. Salma opened the door without question. Zain El Fayez stood there again. No guards, no files, no folders. Just him, holding a single olive branch in his left hand, a gesture both biblical and absurd in its simplicity. "I didn't come to take anything today," he said. She stepped aside. He walked in like someone returning, not visiting, and that changed something in the house. Even the air seemed to shift, to accept his presence without resistance. "I dreamed of this place last night," he said, placing the branch on the table like an offering. "But it wasn't the house, it was the tree, the old one. It spoke." "What did it say?" Salma asked, folding a cloth in her hands. "That I had forgotten." She didn't smile, but something in her eyes softened. She poured him tea, not as a welcome, but as a ritual, a truce made in silence. He looked around. The cracked walls, the faded curtains, the shadowed corners. "This house," he said, "reminds me of my grandmother's breath, the way it slowed in her final days but never stopped. This place exhales." "You don't understand it yet," Salma said, "but you feel it. That's enough." He looked at the children. Omar met his gaze. Hannah, this time, didn't hide. She stood by the window, watching him with calm curiosity. "I was born in a palace," Zayn said, "but raised by a woman who used to wash the floors. Her name was Saba. She sang while she worked. I remember the sound of her songs more than my father's voice." Salma stirred the lentils again. "Then you do know the difference between presence and power." He lowered his eyes. "I came here to carry out a decision," he said, "and instead, I am unraveling." "Maybe that's what the tree meant," she replied. "Maybe forgetting isn't always a weakness. Maybe it's the only way to begin remembering again." He said nothing for a long time, just listened to the pot bubbling, to the wind brushing the clay walls, to Hannah humming softly to herself. When the food was ready, Salma placed 3 bowls on the table, one for each of them. No ceremony, no invitation, just space, offered quietly. They ate together without speaking. Every now and then Zayn glanced at Omar's drawings on the notebook beside him. "These roots," he said, pointing, "they twist like veins." "They are veins," Omar said, "but for trees, or for families," Zayn whispered. After the meal, Salma stood and gathered the dishes. Zayn reached to help. She didn't stop him. Hannah, still humming, placed her ragged doll between them on the table. Its fabric was torn, eyes faded. Zayn picked it up gently. "What's her name?" "Her name is Nada," Hannah said. "She doesn't talk, but she knows." He handed it back with both hands. "Then she's like your mother." Salma looked up at him, sharp but calm. "You think you're clever, but your wounds still bleed in silence," she said. "I'm starting to hear them," he replied. They stepped outside together afterward. The air was thicker now, heavy with the smell of dust and something else, something ancient and blooming. The olive trees swayed faintly, though no wind moved. Zayn walked toward the oldest one again. He knelt by its base. This time he didn't speak. He placed a hand on the trunk, closed his eyes. Salma watched from a distance. The children played in the dry soil nearby, not too far, but not hovering. As if they sensed the tree had something to say that only grown hearts could understand. Minutes passed, or hours. Time moved strangely around roots. When Zayn finally stood, his face had changed. Not in shape, in depth. Something had uncoiled inside him, a story too old for words. "I used to think kings built nations," he said, "but now I wonder if maybe it's the ones who stay behind that keep them alive." Salma nodded slowly. "You came with papers, but now you carry seeds." He looked down at his hand. A single olive pit rested in his palm. "They say it takes decades for an olive tree to bear fruit," he said. She stepped closer. "Then you better start planting." A shadow passed overhead, a hawk tracing circles in the sky. The children laughed at something invisible. Zayn turned to them. "Omar," he said, "would you show me your drawings?" The boy hesitated, then nodded. They sat under the shade of the tree, the notebook between them. Salma watched from the doorway, arms crossed, not in defiance but in stillness. Inside the house, the kettle began to whistle again. Outside, the prince listened not with his ears, but with the part of him that had slept too long beneath marble walls, and something within him whispered back. That night, he didn't return to the capital. He stayed, not in the house, but under the tree, with roots wrapped around his doubts, and stars watching from above, patient, ancient, and full of quiet understanding. The day they called him fatherless. The morning arrived without ceremony. No bird sang, no breeze moved. The light crept in slowly, hesitant, like a child entering a room it no longer recognized. Salma stood barefoot in the center of the kitchen, her hands submerged in a bowl of cool water, her breath steady. She wasn't washing anything, just feeling, letting the stillness speak. The children were quiet too. Omar sat in the corner, drawing slow, deliberate lines that looped back on themselves like questions. Hannah traced a circle on the floor with her finger, over and over, whispering something under her breath that only the walls understood. The silence was not absence. It was anticipation. They had felt it since the night before. Something gathering, not outside, but inside. A turning of something deep, like water finally finding its way through stone. And Salma knew, before the sound of tires on gravel reached her ears, that someone had decided to test the roots again. 2 vehicles appeared this time. Not royal black, government grey, unmarked, but not anonymous. The men who stepped out wore pressed shirts that did not belong to this climate. One held a tablet, the other wore sunglasses that refused to reflect the truth. They walked toward the house with the posture of those who think time belongs to them. Salma stepped out before they could knock. She didn't greet them. "Mrs. Nadir," said the one with the tablet, "yes, you were issued formal notice. The 72-hour period has expired. There has been no recorded extension or appeal. There has been no reply either," Salma said, "which I take to mean silence. Silence is not permission," said the other man. "Neither is forgetting." They turned their attention to the field. And there he was, Zayn el-Fayez, stood beneath the old olive tree, hands in his pockets, shirt wrinkled from sleep. He had not gone home, not to the city, not to the palace. The grove had claimed him, not with force, but with familiarity. He belonged to it now, in a way he had never belonged anywhere. "You are trespassing," said the man with the sunglasses. "I am walking," Zayn said, "where my people planted memory. This is state land now." The prince walked slowly toward them, calm, not defiant, present. "And your state was built on stories just like hers. If you erase them, what do you stand on?" The man with the tablet did not flinch. He scrolled something. Then, without looking up, he spoke. "Prince Zayn el-Fayez, you are a representative of the crown. You were raised by staff after your father fled into exile. You have no official authority beyond your assigned advisory post. This is a legal matter, not a personal one. I suggest you remember your place." The word hung in the air like smoke. "Your father left," said the man with the sunglasses, "vanished, abandoned the throne. You were raised without a name, fatherless. Don't mistake a grove for a crown." Zayn did not move. His expression did not shift, but something in the ground around him did. A quiet quake, not of fear, of recognition. Omar had stepped outside. He stood beside his mother, Hannah behind her, holding the edge of her skirt. They said nothing, but their presence was louder than protest. Zayn looked at Omar, and in that boy's eyes he saw not himself, but his mother, his grandmother, the unnamed women who carried kingdoms without titles. "You came to enforce a paper," Zayn said quietly, "but I came to remember what cannot be signed away." Then he stepped forward and knelt at the base of the old olive tree. He placed both hands on the soil, like a man praying not for salvation, but for grounding. "Salma, Salma," he said without raising his head. She joined him, so did the children. The officials watched. But they no longer saw. They saw defiance. But what stood before them was something more dangerous. Continuity. They had brought orders, but found presence. And presence, once seen, cannot be removed. After long minutes of silence, the men returned to their car. No final warning, no farewell, just the quiet door slam of a system that had no answer. That afternoon, they sat under the fig tree beside the house. Not for ceremony, just because the shade was kind. Zayn looked tired, but not from the heat. From remembering. Salma handed him a cup of tea. They spoke little. You knew what they would say. Salma murmured, yes. And it didn't change your mind? No? Then tell me the rest. He looked down at the ground, at the uneven pattern of roots near his feet. My father didn't flee because he was afraid. He refused to sign a treaty, one that would have given up grazing land in the far south. Said it was sacred to the nomads. Said no coin was worth memory. They called him a traitor and exiled him. My mother died that same year. Some said illness, but it was silence that took her. After that, I was raised in a palace that wasn't mine. By women no one remembered. But I remember their names, Safa, Lena, Amal. They taught me more about dignity than any official ever did. You carry their voices, Salma said. He looked up. I'm trying to carry more. Hana brought him a fig. He took it with both hands, as though accepting a crown. Thank you, he said. She smiled. You can stay under the tree. But not forever, I know. Then what will you do? I don't know yet. She looked at him for a long moment, then stood. There's always work to do. That evening, the children invited him to help fix a broken leg on one of the stools. He held the pieces while Omar nailed them in. Hana sat nearby, brushing her doll's hair with a stick. Salma watched from the doorway. When they lit the lanterns, shadows danced along the walls, soft and uncertain. Zayn looked around the room and said, almost to himself, I came here a prince. He paused. But I think I'm staying as something else. No one replied. They didn't need to. The night understood. The house exhaled, and far above, the stars opened their eyes. What cannot be burned? The fire came not from the sky, but from the hands of men. It was not sudden, but deliberate, carried in jerry cans, whispered into dry grass, fed like a secret fed to the wrong mouth. By the time Salma smelled it, the horizon was already trembling. The scent reached her first. Not wood, not smoke, but something acidic, artificial, the smell of decisions made elsewhere. She stepped outside and saw it, thin ribbons of black rising between the trees. Not high, not wild, but surgical. Omar shouted from the edge of the grove, Mama, the south trees. She didn't run. She walked, fast, but steady, barefoot across cracked soil that seemed to pulse with panic. The flames had found the dry brush near the oldest tree, small but eager, flickering fingers climbing with familiarity. Someone had set it. It wasn't lightning, it wasn't the sun. She reached the base of the old olive, just as the fire kissed its lower branches. Omar brought the bucket. Hana followed with the kettle. Salma didn't scream. She poured again and again. Her arms burned but didn't stop. Her scarf caught sparks. She didn't feel it. Then he arrived, Zayn El Fayez, covered in dust, shirt damp with sweat, eyes wild not with fear but fury. He didn't ask. He joined, he carried, he soaked his own jacket and slapped at the flames. Together they beat back the fire, not with power, with insistence. It took 40 minutes, but the tree stood scorched but breathing. Only then did Salma collapse to her knees. Not in defeat, in relief. Zayn knelt beside her. It was targeted, he said. They wanted the tree. She looked at him. No, she said. They wanted what it remembers. Omar sat in the dirt, staring at the blackened trunk. His drawing pad had fallen beside him. The pages were wet, smeared. He didn't move to pick it up. Hana sat beside the tree and placed her doll near its roots, as if to keep it company. The officials didn't return that day, nor the next. But the message was sent. Salma spent the evening brushing ash from the branches with a cloth, gently, as if wiping the face of an elder in pain. She whispered to the tree again, longer this time. Words the children didn't understand, a language older than law. Zayn brought water from the well, not in buckets, in bowls, careful not to shock the roots. They didn't speak much that night. Only when the moon rose high did he finally ask, will it survive? Salma touched the trunk. It already has. He looked at her, his face open, exposed. And what about you? She didn't answer right away. Fire doesn't frighten me, she said. Being forgotten does. He nodded. I won't forget, you will. One day. But the roots won't. He looked down at his hands, blistered, blackened in places. What now? We rebuild, she said. Without permission, he exhaled slowly. The fire hadn't taken the house, or the trees, or the children, but it had taken something else, certainty, and in its place, something new had begun. That night, Zayn didn't sleep. He sat outside, watching the embers cool. He wrote nothing. He sent no messages. He simply stayed. Listening to what didn't burn in the morning, the grove smelled different, not like smoke, like memory, and the roots held fast, even in silence. The night, the sky remembered. The wind changed that evening. It no longer whispered across the fields. It sang, not a melody but a warning, rising in strange intervals, pressing against the house with a breath that tasted of metal and distance. It came from the north, from the direction of the hills, where the city began to stretch its arms over the land, a sign that something was moving again. Salma stood outside, her arms crossed over her chest. She didn't shiver, but the air seemed to want her to. It wrapped around her ankles, teased her scarf, tried to press between her ribs. Still, she did not retreat, not yet. Behind her, Omar and Hannah sat by the oil lamp. They were drawing again, but differently now. Omar no longer drew trees in isolation. He added roots beneath the earth, twisting and spreading into invisible places. Hannah had started drawing stars, not neat ones, broken, scattered constellations like memory fragments. Zayn returned just after sunset, his eyes darker than usual, his steps slower, his sleeves rolled but streaked with dust from the city roads. They called for a hearing, he said, a formal one. She didn't look at him. She looked at the sky. When tomorrow? He waited for her to speak. She didn't. I have to go back, he said, to the chamber. Still she said nothing. I want you to come with me. Her eyes shifted, not with fear, with calculation. I don't belong there. You do now. She turned to him slowly. No, you belong here. Because this place changed you, but the chambers, they built you, they will unmake you again. Not this time. You sound certain I'm not, but I'm not afraid either. He paused. Will you trust me? She didn't answer with words. She stepped back inside. When she returned, she held a bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside were 4 small olives, each wrinkled but intact. Take them, she said. Place them on the table when they ask what matters. He took the bundle with both hands. They won't understand. They don't have to. But they will remember that night. No one slept. The wind howled until dawn, and even the trees leaned in as if trying to listen. The hearing was held in a tall room of glass and silence. No dust entered there. No roots pushed through its floor. It was sterile, polished, self-contained, and it had never been so full. Zayn stood at the center of it, not behind the table but before it. He wore no royal sash, only a linen shirt and trousers stained with earth. At first, this caused murmurs, then stillness. He placed the cloth bundle on the table, unwrapped it slowly. One by one, he set the 4 olives in a line. What is this? Asked one of the officials. Proof of what presence? Another voice, more stern. We are not here to debate poetry, Your Highness. We are here to resolve a breach of protocol. A royal advisor has refused to enforce state directives, interfered with land reclamation, and according to documentation, remains unlawfully stationed on territory cleared for development. Zayn did not move. What is your defense? He looked at the olives. This is my defense. These trees have been fed with grief, with names, with lullabies that no one recorded. The woman who grew them buried her husband beneath one. She raises her children with its shade. You want documents. I brought you fruit. Another voice, uncertain, Your Highness, with all respect, land must evolve. Then let it evolve with memory, not erasure. Someone cleared their throat. Pages rustled. The woman, Salma Nadir, does not hold legal title. This has been verified. The law cannot name what it never bothered to see. A long silence followed. Then a single voice. What is your proposed resolution? Zayn took a breath. His voice did not rise, but it carried withdraw the order. Recognize her tenure by sovereign exception. Let the grove stand. Build around it if you must, but do not dig into what still breathes. There was tension, a pause wide as the sky, then whispers, then decision. We will review your appeal, said the head of the chamber. You will be notified. Zayn nodded once he took the olives back and left. When he returned to the grove, it was near dusk again. He found Salma sitting beneath the scorched tree, her back against the trunk, eyes half closed, as if waiting for the verdict in the breath of the wind. He sat beside her. I did what I could. She nodded. That's more than most. Omar came and sat beside him. Hana curled against her mother's side. Did they say yes? Not yet. Will they? I don't know. But in the sky above, a strange thing happened. The clouds opened, not violently, but gently, like curtains revealing something once forgotten. And through them came stars, brighter than usual, closer. The kind of stars that made you believe the sky remembered something it hadn't said in a long time. Zayn looked up. You see them. Salma smiled faintly. The roots reached them too. They sat together, 4 of them now, quiet under a sky that stretched like a blessing. No decision had been made, but something greater had answered. And that was enough. The letter that didn't arrive. The morning passed with no news. Not a single car, not a single bird. Even the wind seemed to wait. Time lingered like smoke, curling into corners and sitting heavy on the breath. In the kitchen, Salma boiled water without urgency. She didn't stir it. She didn't measure anything. She just let it rise and fall, like breath that had learned to hold itself in stillness. Outside, the trees remained upright, proud in their silence. The blackened edges of the old olive had turned grey, as if the night had kissed its wounds and told it to keep going. Omar sat beneath it with a notebook balanced on his knees. He wasn't drawing this time. He was writing. He didn't show anyone the words. He didn't need to. Hana ran barefoot in slow circles around the house, not laughing, not humming, just moving the way a child moves when her body remembers joy, even if the sky forgets. Zayn helped Salma hang wet cloths on the line. He said nothing. He hadn't spoken since dawn. The weight of the hearing, of the silence that followed, seemed to have settled in his shoulders. Not heavy, just present. He tied each corner of the cloth carefully, as if securing a sail in a windless sea. You didn't sleep, she said. He shook his head. Neither did I. I waited for a sound, a message. Something nothing came. Maybe that is the message that they decided or that they're afraid to. He looked at her. You think they'll come again, not with fire. Then how? With silence, he looked back at the house. That's harder to fight. She stepped closer. That's why we don't fight it. We outlast it. The day continued, slowly, as if the sun itself was reluctant to move. The shadows stretched longer, earlier than usual. At midday, Hana sat in Salma's lap, her head on her chest. They didn't speak. They just breathed together. Omar brought a fig to Zayn and placed it beside him without a word. Zayn broke it open, stared at the seeds inside. Countless, hidden. "They wait too," he murmured. "For what rain?" Then a sound broke the waiting. A knock, not at the door. On the gate, Zayn rose first. Then Salma. Omar followed a few steps behind. At the wooden gate, a boy stood holding an envelope. He looked no older than 16, nervous, dusty, thin. "For you," he said, handing it to Salma. Then he turned and left without another word. She held the envelope in her hands. No stamp, no seal, just her name, handwritten in blue ink. Salma Nadir Zayn stood beside her. She opened it slowly. The paper inside was folded once, typed, cold. It was not a verdict, it was a deferment. "The decision is postponed pending review," the letter said. "Further deliberations are required. No action will be taken at this time." She handed it to Zayn. He read it, then folded it again, tighter this time. "They're waiting for us to move first," he said, "or for us to give up." She nodded. "Then we don't move." They returned to the house. The light was softer now, not gold, not red, but something between, the kind of light that makes everything look older and more honest. That night, Salma cooked again, a stew of lentils and garlic, not for celebration, for continuity. They ate slowly. No one asked what the letter meant. They already knew after the dishes were washed. They sat outside beneath the sky. Hana fell asleep in Zayn's lap. Omar lay back on the ground, arms behind his head, looking for shapes in the stars. Salma spoke without turning. "You don't have to stay, I know. This isn't yours to carry." He looked at the child sleeping in his arms. "Maybe it is." She was quiet for a while. "Then what will you do now?" "Wait with you. And if they never answer, then we answer for them." The wind moved through the trees again. Not like before, softer, slower. Like the breath of someone who has decided not to leave. And somewhere in the distance, the first dog barked. A sound that meant the village still existed, that the night still belonged to the ones who stayed, and the roots beneath their feet stretched just a little deeper, waiting for no one. When the tree gave back, it began with a crack. Not loud, not violent, just the gentle sound of something old shifting into place. Salma heard it in the early morning, before the sun had fully risen, while rinsing a cloth in the water basin. It echoed softly through the soil, a whisper from beneath the roots. She paused and looked out the window. The grove was still there, silent, steady. But something had changed. She stepped outside, wrapping her shawl loosely around her shoulders. The air held a strange warmth, not heat, weight, as though the land had exhaled something it had been holding far too long. She crossed the yard barefoot, her steps slow, sensing more than seeing. The old olive tree stood exactly where it always had, but at its base, nestled between the roots, something shimmered. She moved closer. The soil was damp, blackened from fire, yes, but now softened, fertile. And there, half hidden in the earth, was a small green shoot. A new branch, impossibly tender, impossibly alive. She knelt before it and placed her palm gently over the sprout. It was warm, living, strong, a gesture of defiance from the earth itself. Behind her, Omar approached, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "What is it?" She didn't answer. She guided his hand to the shoot. He touched it gently, as if afraid it might disappear. It grew back. It remembered Hana appeared beside him, still barefoot, her hair tangled from sleep. "Is it a new tree?" "No, it's the old one, healing." They stood in silence, the three of them, facing that sprout as if it were a flag risen after a long battle. Zayn watched from the doorway. He didn't interrupt. He knew better now. Later that morning, he joined them under the shade. The air was thick with the scent of turned soil, with the texture of life returning slowly. Salma sat beneath the old trunk. He sat beside her. It gave back, he said. It never stopped giving. He looked down at the earth. Maybe we're the ones who stopped listening. She glanced at him, and now he breathed in deeply. Now I want to build around it, not over it. She nodded slowly. That's a beginning. He turned to her. Will you help me? She met his eyes. Yes, but only if you let the tree grow as it needs. No designs, no pruning, no claiming. He smiled for the first time that day, agreed. They began that afternoon, not with machines, not with documents, with hands, with baskets, with cloth and tools too simple to threaten the land. Omar helped clear the debris that still lingered from the fire. Hana swept dust from the paths between trees. Zain carried stones and laid them in quiet rows, tracing the perimeter of the grove, not to enclose it, but to frame it. At dusk, a neighbor came. Then another. Word had spread. They didn't ask questions. They brought food, tools, extra hands. Not because they had been told, but because the land had answered, and they had listened. That night, the grove glowed beneath the lanterns strung between trees. Salma cooked flatbread over a low fire. Children ran between the stumps. Elders sat on overturned baskets, sipping tea, speaking softly of the years before silence. Zain stood at the edge, watching. You've changed this place, Salma said beside him. No, I've only let it change me, and what now? Now I stay. She turned toward the house. For how long? He paused. Until the roots say otherwise. She nodded, then plant deep. The stars appeared again. No ceremony, just presence. Omar pointed at them from the grass, connecting them with his finger. Hana curled beside him, the doll tucked beneath her chin. The neighbors stayed long after the food was gone. Not because they had nowhere to be, because they were already where they needed. When the last lantern dimmed and the final cup was drained, Zain looked at Salma and whispered, Tomorrow, I'll write the letter. Not to the ministry, to the people. They need to hear what I've seen. She didn't answer, but the tree behind her swayed gently, though no wind moved, and that was enough. The place where time paused. The days no longer came with warning. They simply arrived, full and open, like a field after rain. No official letters followed, no more visits, no more threats. In their place came footsteps, laughter, silence, and the slow return of trust. The olive trees healed, not quickly, but completely. Their wounds remained visible, darkened knots where fire once reached. But from those scars came branches that curved toward the sun, unapologetically alive. Zain no longer asked what he should do next. He simply did. He fixed the fence, rebuilt the bench by the well. He taught Omar how to reinforce the stone wall without disturbing the roots. He showed Hana how to write her name in the dirt with a stick, then how to carve it lightly into clay before it dried. Salma watched it all with a stillness that was not detachment, but witness. She no longer had to explain what had been. It was visible now, written in the rhythm of the days. One afternoon, Zain returned from the market carrying seeds, not just olive, but fig, pomegranate, herbs, flowers. He set them on the table and looked at Salma for spring. She nodded. We plant now. He turned to Omar. You'll lead. The boy smiled, not shyly, not with fear. He took the packet in both hands. That night, they marked new rows near the edge of the grove. Soft mounds of soil shaped with fingers, feet, old tools. Zain showed Hana how to press each seed gently, not too deep. Salma followed behind, watering each spot like a blessing. The stars watched. Again, they always had. But now the people below looked back. Weeks passed. The grove grew louder with life. Neighbors visited more often. Children learned the names of trees. Salma taught them how to listen for water in the roots. Zain read to them from a book he hadn't opened in years. His voice was steady now, no longer searching. One day, Hana came running. Mama the sprout is taller. Salma came outside. It was true. The once hidden shoot had now risen a full foot. Its leaves glimmered faintly in the sun. She crouched beside it and pressed her forehead to its stem. "Thank you." Zane stood nearby. "You spoke to it like it hears you." "It does." "And what did it say back?" "That it remembers and forgives." Zane looked out over the grove. "Then maybe we can too." That evening, they lit a small fire in the center of the yard. Not for warmth, for memory. Around it, stories bloomed. Salma spoke of the year the rains never came, of how her husband built the well by hand, one stone at a time. Zane told them about the first time he broke protocol. He had been 15. It had involved a guard, a horse, and a stolen map. Everyone laughed, even Salma. It was the kind of laughter that leaves something behind in the air, soft and lasting. As the flames dimmed, Salma turned to Zane. "You never asked what I wanted." He nodded. "What do you want?" "Nothing." She smiled. "Everything I wanted, I still have, and you." Zane looked at the children, the house, the grove. "I never knew what I wanted until I found it. And now I protect it." They sat long after the fire died. No one hurried to leave. Even the darkness felt like a guest invited, familiar when the moon rose. Omar pointed to it. "Look, Mama, it's full." Salma nodded. "So are we." And that night, the house didn't just sleep. It dreamed. In the years that followed, the grove became more than a place. It became a memory shared by those who passed through it. No signs were posted, no flags flown, but people came, quietly, respectfully. They walked between the trees, touched the bark, sat in the shade, and listened. Zane never returned to the palace, not fully. He wrote, he taught, he built. And when asked why he left, he simply said, "Because I found something that asked me to stay." Salma never sought recognition. Her name was never carved into plaques, but her story moved through the hands of children who grew up knowing the smell of old wood and fire-kissed earth. They remembered her voice, even if they forgot her face. Omar became a builder of things that lasted. Inna, a listener to things that didn't speak, and together they guarded the place where time once paused and reminded everyone who entered that some roots, once threatened, grow stronger, that silence, when honored, becomes legacy, and that not all evictions end with absence. Sometimes they end with home, and under the oldest tree, the one that burned but never fell, there is still a stone, smooth and bare, where children sit to this day and wait for the wind to speak.